which it's not a podcast, it's a Vimeo, whatever.
Right. Well, for YouTube, they said.
Yeah.
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 A person, a photographer or artist who's always inspired you. I guess I'd say Tony Ray Jones, British photographer, died very young, but did an astonishing body of work in the late 60s, having gone to America and learnt the language of new photography from the likes of Winogrand, Frank, Friedlander, that generation of photography. So he took their ideas, took their language and brought it across and imposed it, or translated it into his work in the UK. England, in fact, not the UK. He didn't go to Scotland and Wales. So yeah, I remember seeing that work when I was at college, which was very inspiring. And we have a good collection now of Ray Jones images in the foundation. And I went through his contact prints, and we did a new exhibition of additional prints that I thought were very good that had been overlooked by Tony himself. That was shown at the Science Museum about 8 years ago, 10 years ago. Can't remember. Getting old.
If I answered that question, it would be more seeing Danny Lyons, the bike riders, and wanting to jump on the back of a bike and be in the world. And I loved everything about that at the end of the 60s, and not just the book he made and now the film that's been made about the book he made and about the life he lived.
Do you read his biography?
Part of it, and I'm really curious to see this movie because
Right.
the idea of being seen as a character in a movie. But I think, there was something about that it's not, one part of Danny's practice was finding himself in the middle of a cultural community on one hand, the bike riders, but then the other in the South at the middle of the civil rights movement.
Yeah.
And that
Well, he did that
historical
first, didn't he?
intersection.
Yeah, became the in-house photographer for that group of, I can't
Yeah,
remember what it's called
SNCC.
now. Yeah.
SNCC, and found his way there right out of university to invent a role for himself, So I loved himself throwing himself into history in different ways.
Yeah.
And probably that if there was an influence or an inspiration, that was part of it. Until Danny sent me a bulletproof vest when I was in Central America and said, "Don't get killed." I thought, gee, that was kind of caring enough. So it's also about, maybe different than you're dealing with Tony Ray Jones's archive. It's, for me, Danny has been in my life over 5 decades, and that's sort of an amazing experience, that I think we have also within Magnum, this longitudinal relationships, over time, watching people in and out of their lives.
Yeah.
And I sort of feel close to Danny in that sense.
Yes, I read his biography because I did a Zoom with him on the Parr Foundation talk. But yeah, fascinating life. And he goes into quite, steamy details of who and what and why he met people, living with Robert Frank, all kinds of things that I didn't know about
Danny,
him.
he has an amazing memory too. He's the gift of memory for detail. And, that's why he can write biographies. Not everyone can. If I didn't have my scrapbook, my little notebooks and my diaries, which are not very detailed, or my contact sheets, which sort of function to remind me that I went from here to there and then some other place in between. So, how we remember the richness of our lives, But I met Danny in the Magnum photographer's room in New York when I first joined in '76. And I walked in, I had no idea who he was, and he said to me, "Oh, I know who you are, I just stole your book." Not from Magnum, but from some bookstore.
Really?
He had stolen carnival strippers. He was very proud of it.
Okay.
So I thought that was kind of
So he gave
great.
you a good welcome.
Yeah. If you weren't a photographer, what would you be? I don't know if I can answer that. There's so many other people I am and I could be still. So I don't know. I never really had a defined idea that I wanted to be a photographer, which is part of the challenge in my life, is to sort of figure out how photography relates to who I am, or engages me in who I become, So sometimes that's about photography, sometimes it's about making movies and photographs. I'm looking at photographs as interesting, whether or not they're the ones I've made or other people have made. I've sort of rejected the parts of myself that I didn't want to continue to be. Like, I didn't want to be a teacher for very long. It's too tight and too narrow.
No, but the defining thing about your work is the collaborative process that you have with many, many groups of people, where you try and get behind them, understand them, and make that connection. So that's actually not photography, but the photography is the result of that.
Yeah, or the process towards that. It's sort of
yeah.
and it's evolving. And it began very early, and it was very organic. I mean, I couldn't imagine photographing carnival strippers without their voices. Theirs and the managers and the men, they were just so amazing what it added. But I often think that if I'd had an iPhone, I would have made a movie.
Yeah.
I would have been embedded in that way, or immersed, which I like to think about immersion versus embed, exactly, because embed is so aligned with, military practice, which I never did embed in that way. But I like this feeling of there are other layers that can live around the frame of the photograph.
I made films because I valued the sort of banter that you have with people, especially in England, I guess, because I know that better than anything else. Yeah. And I thought, this is crazy. It's just not being used. It's escaping. So I'm going to make films to basically capture that.
But one of the projects I loved of yours early on, I don't know what year you would tell me, the design series when it was in the subways.
Oh, right.
What was that called?
You mean Signs of the Times?
Signs of the Times.
Yes.
Which I saw, it was on the BBC, but I didn't see the BBC. What I loved were those fabulous posters in the subways. Which is a whole nother thing about photography not being isolated or in a bubble, but moving out into public space, and I went into public space with murals and engaged in a different way, but I really remember that interruption on, in the tubes.
Sure.
What year was
we had 92, that was. But the films were made by a guy called Nicholas Barker, and he'd been to the Photographers Gallery and saw my Cost of Living show. And he therefore invited me to join him on the project. So I went in and did photographs after he'd done the filming. And then we sat down and worked out what quotes would go with the right pictures. And as well as Art in the Underground, that's what it's called, we actually had posters in ad shell sites around the country. You couldn't escape it.
Yeah.
So it's great to have this chance to take things beyond,
partnership.
get out of the ghetto. Oh yeah, the answer to that question would be, I think I'd be a dealer, because I like the process of buying and selling.
Collecting and dealing.
Yes, I'm a natural collector.
You are a collector.
In fact, I deal now because we have a bookshop in the foundation, and we're constantly changing our prices. It's surge pricing. It's the same system as airlines. If lots of people want a book, price goes up. Yeah. And if no one wants them, like the seats are empty, price goes down.
So
That's fun controlling that.
Oh, okay. Can I say one more thing and then invite Greg to sit with you? Was that one of my favorite moments with you was at my breakfast table when we were trying to, once again, a crisis in Magnum. What are we going to do? And one of the ideas was to create the annotated history of books in Magnum. Yeah. And it wasn't just collect the books, but which was hard enough to do, actually, because they were already out of print. We had to buy them and et cetera. But then we came to Arl, in fact, and people sat and either had annotated or added something, and it was the inspiration to make a totally unique history of bookmaking in Magnum. Sure. Yeah. What year was that?
I can't remember either.
It's for
I'd
60th,
say
maybe?
2002, something like that.
So the interesting thing is, think about how many books have been made since then.
I know.
And the important thing was this was a collective history of bookmaking in Magnum, and there were over 1,000 books. It was unbelievable.
Well, Fiden did the book, as you know.
Of the books?
Yes,
the
the Magnum Book of Books. And as you say, and that collection went to Hong Kong.
When I think about whatever year that was, again, another idea that was incredibly exciting. I remember Elliot Erwitz sitting and trying to figure out how he was going to annotate his book. No, there was no social media, so nobody documented it. And then thinking, since then, we've only become a richer bookmaking community. I mean, that's what everyone loves and does.
Yeah.
Okay, Greg.
Fair enough.
Okay.